There is a quiet revolution happening inside certain minds. It does not announce itself with noise or spectacle. It moves in whispers, in pauses, in the space between what is said and what is meant. The people who carry this revolution rarely speak of it. They are too busy living inside it, navigating a world that feels both infinitely fascinating and strangely foreign. These are the deep thinkers. Not the ones who simply know more facts or solve problems faster, but the ones who experience reality at a different frequency altogether. They are the minds that cannot accept surfaces, the hearts that feel what others merely observe, the souls that ask why until the question itself becomes a kind of home. If you have ever felt like your thoughts were too heavy for casual conversation, if you have ever looked at a sunset and felt grief for its passing before it even ended, if you have ever understood someone so completely that their pain became your own, then you already know what it means to think deeply. It is not a skill you learn. It is a way of being that chooses you, often before you are ready to carry its weight. Because deep thinking is not simply intelligence dressed in philosophical clothing. It is sensitivity sharpened to a point where everything cuts. It is awareness expanded until the ordinary becomes extraordinary and the simple becomes impossibly complex. It is a gift wrapped in burden, a blessing that sometimes feels like a curse. The architecture of a deep thinker's mind operates differently than most. Neuroscience has begun mapping these differences, discovering that certain brains show heightened activity in what researchers call the default mode network. This constellation of neural regions activates during moments of introspection, imagination, and self-reflection. For most people, this network awakens occasionally during daydreams or quiet moments before sleep. For deep thinkers, it rarely rests. Their minds exist in a state of perpetual connection-making, weaving together memories and possibilities, analyzing patterns that others never notice, searching for meaning the way lungs search for oxygen. This is why a deep thinker cannot simply look at a tree. They see the centuries of growth encoded in its rings, the silent conversation between roots and soil, the metaphor of reaching toward light despite being anchored to earth. Everything becomes a doorway to something larger. This tendency toward constant analysis is what psychologists term high-trait introspection. Deep thinkers do not merely experience events. They examine those events from multiple angles while simultaneously examining their own reactions to those events. They live inside a hall of mirrors where every thought reflects into another thought, where every feeling opens into a question about why that feeling exists. They ask why not to be difficult or contrary, but because understanding is as essential to them as breathing. The world presents itself as a puzzle that demands solving, a story that demands interpretation, a mystery that demands investigation. And their minds will not rest until they have explored every corridor of possibility. But this same capacity for depth creates an invisible barrier between them and the world. While others react to life in real time, deep thinkers observe from a slight remove, processing information through layers of analysis before responding. They pause before speaking, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of considering every possible interpretation of what they might say. And often, by the time they have crafted a response worthy of the complexity they perceive, the conversation has moved elsewhere. So they remain silent, and that silence is misread as disinterest or aloofness or absence. But it is none of these things. It is the sound of a mind working at depths that most people never reach. Deep thinkers hunger for a particular kind of connection that the world rarely offers. They crave conversations that venture beneath the surface, discussions that touch the raw nerves of existence rather than skating safely across pleasantries. They want to know what keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, what dream you abandoned because it felt too fragile to protect, what truth you have never spoken aloud because you feared no one would understand. Small talk exhausts them because it feels like being offered a sip of water when they are dying of thirst. They need depth the way others need comfort. They need meaning the way others need entertainment. And when they cannot find these things, they retreat into the only place where depth is always available: their own minds. This is where the shadow side of deep thinking emerges. The same mind that perceives profound connections can become trapped in loops of overthinking. Deep thinkers replay conversations long after they have ended, dissecting every word for hidden meanings, wondering if they revealed too much or not enough. They analyze choices until the analysis itself becomes paralyzing. They can see so many possible interpretations of a single moment that certainty becomes impossible. This is not insecurity in the conventional sense. It is the natural consequence of perceiving nuance everywhere. When you understand that every action ripples outward in countless directions, even simple decisions become weighted with significance. Psychology has a term for this particular kind of awareness: meta-cognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your thoughts as if from outside them. Most people engage in metacognition occasionally, during moments of deliberate self-reflection. Deep thinkers inhabit metacognition as a permanent state. They watch their minds the way scientists observe experiments, noting patterns, questioning assumptions, trying to understand not just what they think, but why they think it. This grants them remarkable self-awareness. They can recognize their biases, trace their emotions to their origins, understand the hidden architecture of their own psychology. But it also means they see their flaws in high definition. Every imperfection stands illuminated under the constant light of their attention. Every mistake echoes longer than it should. They cannot stop analyzing what went wrong and why. The deep thinker does not ask simple questions. They do not wonder merely what they want from life. They interrogate the desire itself. Where did this want originate? What wound or hope gave it birth? What would fulfillment actually feel like, and would it satisfy or simply create new hungers? They examine love until they understand its chemistry, dissect fear until they can name its ancestors, analyze memory until they can almost hold the past in their hands like something physical. But somewhere in this relentless examination, they risk losing something precious: the ability to simply experience without translating experience into understanding, the capacity to feel without needing to explain why they feel, the freedom to exist in a moment without immediately converting that moment into material for analysis. You will often find deep thinkers seeking solitude, not because they are lonely or antisocial, but because solitude is where they feel most themselves. They need space the way others need company. Room to process the constant stream of observations and insights that flow through their minds. Room to untangle the complex threads that others do not even perceive. They might spend hours walking alone, lost in thought, or sitting in quiet corners watching the world pass, while their inner dialogue continues its endless exploration. They are not avoiding life. They are processing it at a depth that requires concentration. They are translating experience into meaning, and that translation requires silence. But this rich inner life comes with a particular kind of isolation. Deep thinkers often feel like strangers in a world that moves too fast and thinks too shallowly. They observe how people say one thing while meaning another, how society celebrates values it simultaneously undermines, how everyone performs versions of themselves that have little to do with who they actually are. Once you start seeing these patterns, you cannot unsee them. The comfortable illusions that make social life smooth begin to dissolve. Small talk becomes performance. Casual relationships become exhausting. The hunger for authenticity grows until it becomes almost painful. This is why deep thinkers are so selective about their connections. They are not being difficult or elitist. They are searching for the rare people who can meet them at their depth, who want truth more than comfort, who are willing to explore the complicated territories of genuine understanding. One of the most fascinating aspects of deep thinking is its tendency toward existential contemplation. Deep thinkers do not merely wonder about their own lives. They question existence itself. They lie awake considering the nature of time, the mystery of consciousness, the strange miracle of anything existing rather than nothing. They ask questions that have no comfortable answers and find themselves drawn toward the edges of human understanding where certainty dissolves into wonder. This separates them from ordinary overthinkers. Overthinking is anxiety focused on specific outcomes. Deep thinking is curiosity directed at the fabric of reality itself. It is the difference between worrying about tomorrow and wondering why there is a tomorrow at all. But here lies a paradox that every deep thinker must navigate. The same mind that perceives genuine patterns can also construct patterns that do not exist. When you think deeply enough, you can connect anything to anything. Meaning becomes infinite, and infinite meaning can become a prison. Deep thinkers sometimes read significance into silence that was merely distraction. They construct elaborate theories from casual words. They transform simple moments into philosophical puzzles that resist resolution. Their gift for perception becomes a liability when it perceives things that are not actually there. Learning to distinguish genuine insight from constructed interpretation is one of the essential skills a deep thinker must develop. Yet this capacity for unusual perception is precisely what makes deep thinkers so valuable. Throughout history, the minds that reshaped human understanding belonged to people who could not accept surfaces. They saw connections invisible to others. They approached familiar problems from angles no one had considered. They asked why persistently enough to discover answers that changed everything. The deep thinker's refusal to accept the obvious is not a flaw. It is the engine of creativity and innovation. When your mind will not rest until it has examined every possibility, you eventually discover possibilities that others missed entirely. The challenge is that modern society does not always celebrate this kind of thinking. We live in an age that rewards speed over reflection, productivity over contemplation, confidence over nuance. The deep thinker's pause before speaking can look like hesitation. Their complexity can seem like indecision. Their need for solitude can appear antisocial. So many deep thinkers learn to hide their depth, to perform normalcy in a world that moves faster than their minds prefer. They nod along with conversations even while their thoughts explore entirely different territories. They smile appropriately while internally they are questioning everything. They learn to pass as ordinary while carrying an extraordinary inner life that no one suspects. There is a specific loneliness in this kind of existence. Deep thinkers crave connection with an intensity that would surprise most people, but only connection that feels genuine. And genuine connection requires vulnerability, the willingness to expose the strange and complicated territories of your inner world to someone else. But not everyone wants that kind of depth. Not everyone can meet it, so deep thinkers become careful. They watch for signs of kindred spirits. They test the waters with small revelations before risking larger ones. They protect their inner world because they have learned that exposing it to the wrong people leads only to being misunderstood or dismissed. But when they do find someone who can meet them at their depth, something remarkable happens. They open completely. They share their fears and hopes and the thoughts they have never spoken aloud. Deep thinkers do not know how to love halfway. Their hearts do not operate in fractions. When they trust you with everything. Their love is not casual. It is conscious and complete. This vulnerability carries risk that deep thinkers understand better than most. Because when you perceive the world in shades of complexity, you expect others to do the same. You assume people mean precisely what they say, that honesty functions as a baseline rather than an exception. You invest meaning into everything because meaning is how you experience reality. But not everyone operates from that depth. And when reality fails to match expectation, when someone proves less genuine than you believed, the wound cuts deeper than it would for others. Not because deep thinkers are fragile, but because they have invested so much significance into the connection. To them, even small betrayals feel like earthquakes. The meaning they assign to the relationship makes its loss proportionally devastating. But the reverse is also true. Small kindnesses land with unusual force. Brief moments of genuine understanding can restore their faith in everything. For the deep thinker, nothing is neutral. Everything matters. This intensity of experience extends far beyond relationships. Deep thinkers feel emotions at amplitudes that would overwhelm most people. They might appear calm on the surface, composed and controlled, but beneath that stillness, their inner world churns with feeling. They can sit in a room and sense the tension between people who have not spoken a word about their conflict. They notice when someone's laughter does not match their eyes. They feel the weight of things unsaid hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. Their sensitivity functions like an antenna tuned to frequencies that others cannot detect. They receive information constantly, emotional data streaming in from everyone around them, and they cannot turn it off. This is why deep thinkers often feel exhausted after social interactions that others find energizing. They are not merely participating in conversations. They are processing layers of subtext and emotion that most people never perceive. They absorb the feelings of those around them, sometimes carrying weight that does not belong to them. A friend's hidden sadness becomes their own. A stranger's anxiety becomes something they feel in their chest. This is the burden of profound empathy. It grants them remarkable insight into others, but it also means they are constantly managing emotional information that has nowhere to go. They need solitude not as escape but as recovery. Time alone allows them to distinguish their own feelings from the feelings they have absorbed. It allows them to release what does not belong to them and reconnect with their own center. In those quiet moments of solitude, deep thinkers engage in a kind of internal housekeeping that is essential to their well-being. They journal or reflect or simply stare at nothing while their minds slowly reorganize. They think about everything and nothing, allowing thoughts to arise and dissolve without forcing them toward conclusions. They might replay the day, not from anxiety, but from the need to process what happened at the depth it deserves. They might imagine conversations they will never have, working through emotions by giving them imaginary expression. They might lose themselves in music that articulates feelings they could never put into words. This is not loneliness. This is restoration. For the deep thinker, solitude is where they become themselves again after spending time being available to everyone else. But deep thinking without grounding can become a spiral that leads nowhere healthy. The healthiest deep thinkers learn to anchor their rich inner world to external reality through deliberate practice. They develop mindfulness not as a trendy technique, but as genuine survival skill. They learn to observe their thoughts without being consumed by them. They cultivate creativity as a way to externalize what would otherwise remain trapped inside, translating the invisible into something tangible. Art, writing, music, or any form of creative expression becomes a pressure valve that prevents internal pressure from building to dangerous levels. They also learn the value of service to others, discovering that their capacity for understanding becomes meaningful when it helps someone else feel less alone. Without expression, thought becomes weight. Without purpose, depth becomes burden. The wisest deep thinkers find ways to channel their perception into something that enriches both their own lives and the lives of others. One of the most valuable qualities of deep thinkers is their refusal to accept things simply because those things have always been accepted. They question the systems that everyone else takes for granted. They examine traditions that have outlived their usefulness. They challenge assumptions that most people follow without ever asking whether those assumptions still serve anyone. This can make them appear rebellious or difficult, like they are intentionally creating problems where none need exist. But their questioning comes from a place of genuine care. They are not trying to tear things down. They are trying to understand whether those things deserve to stand. Their curiosity is an act of love for truth, even when truth proves uncomfortable. They believe that understanding why we do things matters as much as doing them. And they are willing to sit with the discomfort of questions that have no easy answers. But this same curiosity creates its own complications. When you can genuinely understand multiple perspectives on any issue, choosing sides becomes almost impossible. You see the fear behind the aggression, the wound behind the cruelty, the confusion behind the confidence. You understand how people become what they are, how circumstances shape choices, how everyone is both victim and creator of their own suffering. And when you see all of that with clarity, simple judgments feel like lies. The deep thinker struggles to condemn anyone completely because they understand too much about why people do what they do. This is the burden of empathy at its fullest expression. It makes righteous anger difficult to sustain. It makes certainty feel like a form of blindness. It makes the world impossibly intricate in ways that resist the simplification everyone else seems to need. This is why deep thinkers often feel out of place in a world that rewards confident opinions and quick judgments. While others rush to take sides and declare positions, deep thinkers hesitate. Not because they lack conviction, but because they respect complexity too much to pretend it does not exist. They know that words carry weight, that positions create consequences, that the truth usually contains more dimensions than any single perspective can capture. Their hesitation is not weakness. It is wisdom. But it can look like weakness to those who mistake speed for strength and certainty for intelligence. Yet, despite their seriousness, deep thinkers possess a capacity for humor that often surprises those who do not know them well. When you truly understand the absurdity of existence, laughter becomes its own form of wisdom. They see the cosmic comedy in human pretension, the irony in our desperate attempts to control what cannot be controlled, The strange hilarity of beings who know they will die, yet argue about trivial things as if they will live forever. Their humor tends toward the observational and the philosophical. They laugh not because they take nothing seriously, but because they take everything seriously enough to recognize when laughter is the only sane response. They understand that sometimes the deepest acknowledgement of life's difficulty is to smile at its beautiful absurdity. If you love a deep thinker, you will discover that they value understanding far more than agreement. They do not need you to reach the same conclusions they reach. They need you to accompany them in the process of reaching conclusions, to wonder alongside them, to ask questions without demanding immediate answers, to explore the strange territories of existence as partners rather than opponents. Their love language is genuine curiosity about who you really are. Their affection expresses itself through attention, through remembering the small things you mentioned once and never expected anyone to notice, through asking how you truly feel and waiting patiently for the honest answer, through seeing you beyond the surface you present to the world and loving what they find beneath. But loving a deep thinker also requires patience they rarely request but desperately need. They move slowly when it comes to trust, because trust means vulnerability, and vulnerability has cost them before. They watch you carefully, not from suspicion but from the need to understand whether your depth matches theirs. They test the waters with small revelations before risking the larger ones. They need to know that you can handle complexity before they show you how complex they truly are. And when they finally decide that you are safe, they do not open partially. They open entirely. They offer you access to territories they have never shown anyone else, their darkest fears, their most fragile hopes, the thoughts they have barely admitted to themselves, because deep thinkers do not know how to offer half of themselves. Their love is total when it finally arrives. There is something profoundly human about the way deep thinkers experience existence. They remind us that life was never meant to be skimmed, that meaning requires attention, that understanding demands time. They stand as evidence that silence can hold more truth than noise, that questions can be more valuable than answers, that mystery has its own kind of beauty that certainty can never provide. In a world that moves faster every year, they represent something ancient and necessary. The willingness to pause, the courage to look closely, the faith that depth matters even when the surface seems sufficient. Perhaps that is why deep thinkers exist, to slow the rest of us down, to remind us what genuine attention looks like, to demonstrate that thought, when pursued with sincerity, becomes an act of love for the world. Because thinking deeply is not merely about understanding life, it is about honoring life. It is about standing in genuine awe of how intricate existence is, how brief our time within it, how strangely beautiful everything becomes when you look closely enough. So if you recognize yourself in these words, if you have spent your life feeling like your mind works differently than those around you, know this: your depth is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a gift to be cultivated. The world needs minds like yours more than it will ever openly admit. It needs people who can see what remains invisible to most, who can question what everyone else accepts without examination, who can find significance in what others dismiss as ordinary. You might not always feel like you belong, but belonging was never your purpose. Your purpose is to see through surfaces to what lies beneath, to transform confusion into clarity, to translate noise into meaning, to find the extraordinary hiding inside the ordinary. Deep thinking is not simply a way of processing information. It is a way of being alive. It is the decision to experience existence at full depth rather than skating across its surface. It is the courage to ask questions that might not have answers. It is the vulnerability to feel everything rather than numbing yourself to what hurts. And while this way of being brings challenges that others never face, it also brings rewards they will never know. The richness of a mind that never stops discovering. The intensity of emotions fully felt. The satisfaction of understanding that goes beyond the superficial. The rare but profound connection with others who share your depth. In a world growing shallower by the day, your depth is its own kind of light. It illuminates what others walk past without seeing. It reveals what others prefer to ignore. It matters, even when no one tells you that it matters. Even when you feel alone in your perception, know that you are part of a lineage of minds that stretches back through history. The philosophers and artists and seekers who could not accept easy answers. The ones who kept asking why until they found something true. The ones who felt too much and thought too deeply and refused to apologize for either. You are not broken. You are awake. And the world needs you awake, even when it does not know how to say so. Your silence holds more than most people's noise. Your questions matter more than most people's answers. Your depth in a shallow world is exactly what the shallow world is missing. Never apologize for who you are. Never shrink to fit spaces that were not built for minds like yours. The spaces that cannot hold you were never meant to be your home. Your home is in the depth itself. In the endless exploration. In the courage to keep thinking when others have already stopped. That is where you belong. That is who you are. And that is more than enough.